The knock came after midnight. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 slow taps against the outer supply gate. Inside the prisoner of war camp, no civilian was supposed to be anywhere near that fence after dark. A guard froze. Another reached for his lantern. Someone whispered, "Did you hear that?" Then it came again. 3 taps. Beyond the wire, a shadow shifted. Not a soldier. Not a patrol. A woman. Alone. Holding something wrapped in cloth. And she wasn't asking for food. She was asking for help. But why would a civilian cross enemy lines in the middle of the war to seek help from the very men her country called enemies? What did she know that no one else did? And what was inside that cloth? The year was 1944. The war had stretched longer than anyone expected. In parts of Europe, supply lines were broken, hospitals were overwhelmed, rural villages had been stripped of doctors, medicine, and even basic tools. In one remote agricultural region, far from major battlefronts, a temporary POW camp had been established. The prisoners were enemy soldiers, captured months earlier, now held under guard, assigned labor, and watched carefully. Officially, civilians were forbidden from speaking to them. Unofficially, things were more complicated. The camp was short on supplies. The village was short on everything. Food was rationed. Fuel was scarce. And the town's only physician had been conscripted and sent to the front. That left farmers, mothers, children, and problems no one could fix. At first, villagers avoided even looking at the camp. But one afternoon, something small happened. A boy fell from a wagon. A prisoner, once a trained medic, reacted before anyone else. The guards hesitated. The villagers watched. And for a moment, the lines between enemy and neighbor blurred. But rules were rules. Or were they? Among the prisoners was a former field medic, 32 years old, quiet, observant. Before the war, he had worked in a small-town clinic, delivering barbies, setting broken bones, treating fevers. Now he wore a faded uniform marked POW. He didn't speak much, but he watched everything. There was also a schoolteacher in the camp, a pharmacist, even a dentist. Captured soldiers, but trained professionals. Inside the camp, daily life followed strict routines. Roll call, labor assignments, thin meals, early silence. Yet something had shifted. A guard once asked quietly, "You really studied medicine?" A prisoner nodded. No more was said. Days later, a villager was seen standing near the fence at dusk. Not speaking, just watching. Why? And why did the guards pretend not to notice? It began with small things. A package left near the outer fence. Not food. Not a weapon. Bandages. Another day, a basket of boiled potatoes placed where prisoners worked in the fields. No one claimed responsibility. Then came whispers in the village. A child with a worsening infection. An elderly man struggling to breathe. The town had no antibiotics left. One night, a guard was overheard saying, "If anyone asks, we saw nothing." Saw nothing about what? Then someone reported seeing a lantern moving between the outer gate and the guard post long after curfew. And the knock came. 3 taps. Who would risk arrest to ask the enemy for help? The woman at the gate that night wasn't carrying supplies. She was carrying a child. Burning with fever. Barely conscious. Her husband had been taken months earlier. The nearest hospital was 2 days away and unreachable. The guard hesitated. Protocol was clear, but the child's breathing was not. Fast, shallow, uneven. A decision had to be made. Quietly, the gate opened just enough. The medic prisoner was escorted under watch. No one spoke loudly. The air smelled of damp soil and cold iron. Inside a storage shed near the outer wall, under lantern light, the medic examined the child. He asked for hot water, clean cloth, anything. The guards stood rigid. This wasn't in the rulebook. Minutes passed. The fever spiked, then slowly stabilized. But the medic said something that unsettled everyone. She will need more care tomorrow. Tomorrow? How could that be arranged without anyone knowing? And what if others found out? The next morning, nothing was mentioned at roll call. Not the knock, not the shed, not the feverish child. But something had changed. The guards were quieter. One of them avoided eye contact with the medic. Another checked the perimeter twice instead of once. Boots crunched slower across gravel as if each step might expose something hidden beneath it. Inside the administrative hut, a report was being written. Then rewritten. Then folded. Ink scratched sharply across paper. Stopped. Resumed. What exactly should be documented? A civilian presence after curfew. A breach of protocol. Or a medical intervention that prevented a death. The officer paused. He tore the page out. Wide. By mid-afternoon, rumors had already begun moving through the village. The child was alive, breathing normally, sleeping peacefully, and that news traveled faster than any official notice. 2 women were seen speaking near the well. A farmer stopped by the edge of the road near the camp fence. A cart lingered longer than usual. The guards noticed, and so did the prisoners. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Something fragile had formed, and fragile things are dangerous in wartime. That evening, a higher-ranking officer arrived unexpectedly. No warning, no scheduled inspection, just a vehicle pulling up in a cloud of dust. The engine cut off. Silence. The guards stiffened immediately. The officer asked one question. Anything unusual? There was a pause. A long one. One guard swallowed. Nothing to report, sir. The officer's eyes scanned the fence line, the storage shed, the ground near the outer gate. He stepped inside the administrative hut. The logbook was on the desk. He flipped through the pages slowly. Stopped. Turned back one page. Then forward again. Why did his finger rest on a blank space dated the previous night? Later that night, the guards gathered quietly near the watchtower. No raised voices. Just low whispers carried by wind. If command finds out. They won't. You don't know that. And if we hadn't helped. No one answered that. Because everyone knew the alternative. The air felt heavier than before. As if the camp itself were holding its breath. Inside the prisoner barracks, the medic sat on his cot. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't smiling. He was waiting. Because once something begins, it rarely stops. He had seen it before in war zones, in villages, in hospitals. Need spreads, and word spreads faster. Would there be another knock? He didn't have long to wonder. 3 nights later, there it was again. 3 taps. But this time, it wasn't a child. It was an elderly man, barely able to stand. And behind him, 2 more villagers waiting in shadow. The guard at the gate hesitated longer this time. This wasn't an emergency. This was becoming a pattern. And patterns attract attention. The officer who had inspected earlier returned, sooner than expected. This time, he didn't ask if anything unusual had happened. He asked a different question. Why are civilians gathering near this perimeter after dark? No one answered immediately. Because now it wasn't just about compassion. It was about control. If word reached regional command, the consequences could be severe. Fraternization with prisoners. Unauthorized medical collaboration. Security breach. Punishments wouldn't be light. The officer ordered increased patrols. Double watches after sunset. Stricter movement logs. But strangely, he did not issue an outright ban. Why? Some believed he understood the situation better than he admitted. A stable village meant fewer supply problems. Fewer desperate civilians meant fewer riots. Fewer riots meant fewer reports sent upward. But there was another possibility. Perhaps he had family somewhere else. Perhaps he imagined them sick. Alone. Without help. War makes enemies. But illness ignores uniforms. The next week, something else disappeared. The logbook entries from the previous 5 nights. Gone. No torn edges. No visible damage. Just missing. Only blank numbered pages where ink once existed. Who removed them? A guard trying to protect himself. The officer trying to protect everyone. Or someone higher up ensuring there would be no record at all. In the village, subtle changes appeared. A basket of fresh bread was left near the field where prisoners worked. A small sack of onions placed beside a tool shed. No names attached. No witnesses. The guards confiscated nothing. They simply pretended not to notice. And the prisoners said nothing. Because saying something would make it real. And making it real would make it punishable. But tension was building. One night, a new sentry was assigned to the outer post. He hadn't been there during the first knock. He hadn't seen the fever. He hadn't heard the shallow breathing. When the tapping came again, he raised his rifle and shouted. The entire camp froze. Lanterns flared. Boots ran across gravel. This time, the secrecy almost shattered. The woman outside dropped what she was carrying. Medicine herbs spilled into dirt. Her hands trembled. For a moment, it seemed the fragile understanding would collapse. But the senior guard intervened quickly. Stand down. His voice was firm, controlled, but something in his eyes revealed it. The situation was slipping beyond quiet tolerance. And once things slip, they rarely return to balance. Inside the administrative hut, the officer stared at the perimeter map. He drew a small circle around the outer shed, then erased it. He leaned back. If he reported the activity, investigations would follow. If he ignored it, he risked his own position. If he allowed it quietly, he maintained peace. But peace built on secrecy is unstable. How long could this continue before someone talked? Before someone wrote a letter? Before someone higher up asked why the village mortality rate had mysteriously dropped? The camp was no longer just a detention site. It had become something else. A hidden clinic. An unspoken alliance. A silent exchange of survival. But alliances in wartime are dangerous, especially when they aren't acknowledged. And the greatest risk wasn't the enemy outside the fence. It was exposure. Because if one wrong person discovered the truth, the gate would close permanently, and the knocks would never come again. And somewhere in the dark, another shadow was already approaching the fence, carrying something heavier than before. But this time, it wasn't illness, it was information. And that would change everything. Years later, when the war had long ended and the fences had rusted into the ground, historians tried to understand what truly happened at that camp. But the records were incomplete. Pages missing, dates misaligned, names scratched out. And whenever something is missing from history, questions multiply. So what really happened there? Several explanations emerged. None fully proven. None fully dismissed. The simplest explanation is often the most powerful. The prisoners were trained professionals, medics, pharmacists, dentists. They had taken oaths long before they took up arms. Perhaps when civilians appeared at the gate, they did not see nationality. They saw patience, a fever, a broken limb, a struggling child, and they acted. Because that is what they were trained to do. Some post-war testimonies support this. A former guard reportedly said they worked silently, no demands, no negotiations. Just treatment, just care. If this theory is true, then what happened at the camp was not rebellion, not conspiracy, but simple human instinct rising above wartime division. But then a question remains. If it was purely humanitarian, why erase the logbooks? Why conceal the visits? Why deny it happened? Compassion rarely needs to hide, unless someone feared how it would be interpreted. Another explanation is more strategic. By 1944, rural regions were fragile. Food shortages, illness, and fear created instability. If villages began to suffer visibly, if children died, if infections spread, unrest could follow. Riots, refusal to cooperate, sabotage of military supply lines. Allowing prisoners to quietly provide medical aid may have served a larger purpose. Keep the village stable. Keep the workforce intact. Prevent panic. From this perspective, the officer who asked anything unusual may have already known the answer. His silence may not have been mercy. It may have been calculation. After all, the camp never officially acknowledged the activity. But patrols were increased only slightly. The gate was never permanently sealed. And the missing logbook pages, they may have been removed not to hide wrongdoing, but to maintain plausible deniability. If questioned later, there would be nothing to confirm, nothing to deny. But if this was policy disguised as ignorance, where is the documentation? No regional directive has ever surfaced approving such cooperation. And wartime bureaucracy was meticulous. So was this strategy, or improvisation? A third possibility suggests something more mutual. Perhaps the help was not entirely one-sided. Some villagers later recalled that food supplies in the camp improved slightly during that winter. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable. Bread portions slightly larger. Vegetables appearing more regularly. Coincidence or gratitude? In rural wartime economies, unofficial exchanges were common. Eggs for labor, milk for tools, medical care for food. If villagers left bread near the fence and guards failed to notice, that could signal silent approval. Not bribery, not corruption, but survival-based cooperation. However, this theory introduces discomfort. If prisoners benefited from extra food, Could it be seen as favoritism? Would other camps view it as weakness? And if higher command suspected such exchanges, would they tolerate it or punish it? The absence of punishment is telling, but absence of proof is equally troubling. Was this collaboration too small to notice, or carefully shielded from scrutiny? The final theory is the most controversial. Some believe the medical visits became more than humanitarian assistance. They became conversation points. Villagers talk about troop movements, about shortages, about morale. If prisoners listened carefully, even while treating a fever, they could gather fragments of information. Nothing dramatic, just small pieces. And small pieces can matter in wartime. There is one surviving testimony from a regional archive that mentions concern over civilian prisoner proximity. But it does not specify why. Was it fear of sympathy or fear of information leaks? No direct evidence proves that intelligence passed through those midnight meetings. But the possibility alone would have alarmed authorities. If that risk existed, why was the activity not crushed immediately? Unless the information flow was exaggerated, or unless it never truly existed. Across all theories, one detail remains consistent: silence. After the war, villagers rarely spoke publicly about the camp. When interviewed decades later, one resident reportedly said, "It was better that way." Better for whom? For the former guards, for the prisoners, or for the community that survived because of them. Even among released prisoners, references to the camp are brief. A sentence here, a paragraph there. No dramatic memoirs, no triumphant declarations, just quiet acknowledgement, almost as if everyone involved agreed, without ever saying it, that what happened there did not fit cleanly into categories of enemy and ally. And history prefers clean categories. So which explanation feels most convincing? Was it simple humanity breaking through the uniform? Was it strategic tolerance by officers trying to maintain order? Was it mutual survival through unspoken exchange? Or something deeper, more complex, hidden behind erased ink and guarded memories? Perhaps the truth is not a single theory. Perhaps it is a combination. Human compassion operating within strategic necessity. Silence protecting both sides. But one detail remains unresolved. On the final week, before the prisoners were transferred, there was one last knock. And according to a surviving oral account, the gate did not open immediately. It opened slowly, as if everyone involved understood that once the prisoners were gone, the knocks would stop forever. And they did. No official explanation was ever recorded. No disciplinary action filed. No commendations issued. Just silence. And sometimes, silence tells the loudest story of all. Now I ask you, which theory do you believe? Was it courage, calculation, exchange, or something history still refuses to admit? By early spring, the snow had begun to melt. Mud replaced frost. Water dripped from the camp roofs. The fence wires no longer glittered with ice. And then the orders came. The prisoners were being transferred. No explanation given. No ceremony. Just names read aloud at roll call. The medic listened quietly as his number was called. He didn't look toward the village. But he knew. The guards knew too. Because for weeks, the knocks had become part of the night. Soft, careful, human. And now they would end. On the final evening before departure, the sky was unusually clear. No clouds, no wind, just stillness. The kind of stillness that feels like something waiting. Inside the barracks, belongings were folded neatly, boots cleaned, blankets stacked. Routine. Order. But beneath that order was something heavier. Unfinished. Outside the fence, shadows lingered longer than usual. Not approaching. Not knocking. Just standing at a distance. Watching. Did they know this was the last night? Or were they hopping for one final answer? It happened just after midnight. 3 taps. The same pattern as the very first night. Not loud. Not desperate. Just deliberate. The guard at the post froze. He recognized it instantly. For a moment, no one moved. Because opening the gate now would change nothing. The prisoners were leaving at dawn. Whatever help could be given would be temporary. And yet, the guard stepped forward. Slowly, he opened the small viewing hatch. On the other side stood the same woman from months before. The one who had carried her feverish child. This time she carried nothing. No bundle. No medicine herbs. No emergency. Just a small cloth pouch. She didn't ask for help. She said only one sentence. "She's running again." The guard said nothing. He closed the hatch, turned, and walked toward the barracks. The medic was escorted out one last time. No lantern this time. Just moonlight. Cold, pale, quiet. They stood on opposite sides of the wire. Close enough to see each other clearly. Too far to shake hands. The woman held up the cloth pouch. Inside it, bread. Fresh. Still warm. She placed it gently at the base of the fence. No speeches. No thanks spoken loudly. Just eye contact. Longer than before. Then she stepped back into the darkness. And this time, there was no need to open the gate. At dawn, trucks arrived. Engines humming low. Orders barked briefly. The prisoners lined up. As they climbed aboard, no villagers stood openly by the road. But curtains moved. Doors cracked slightly open. Silent witnesses. The medic did not wave. He did not turn dramatically. He simply looked once toward the outer field, where the fence met the dirt road. And then the trucks pulled away, dust rising slowly behind them. By noon, the camp was quieter than it had ever been. No knocks that night. None the night after. The storage shed remained locked. The logbooks continued normally. Routine restored. As if nothing unusual had ever occurred. Years passed. The war ended. The fences were dismantled. The land returned to farming. Children grew older. Some of them never knowing how close their survival had once come to silence. In archived interviews decades later, one elderly resident said, "We survived that winter because of men we were told to fear. But no official record confirms it. No plaque marks the shed. No document lists the midnight visits. Only missing pages. Blank spaces where ink should be. And memories that grow quieter with time. But think back to the beginning. 3 taps against cold iron. A woman in the dark. A child burning with fever. If that gate had stayed closed, how many lives would have changed? How many stories would never have been told? War draws lines. Clear lines. Enemy. Ally. Us. Them. But on certain nights, in certain places, those lines blur. Not because politics change, not because treaties are signed, but because someone chooses to open a gate, even slightly. And sometimes, that small opening is enough to rewrite what survival looks like. So now I leave you with the same question that lingered over that camp. When the knock comes, and it will come in one form or another, do you follow the rulebook? Or do you follow your conscience? Tell me what you think happened there. Which theory do you believe? And what would you have done? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share my video.